Hello, everyone, and welcome to this installment of our AGU Webinars Professional Development Series featuring Tami Forman, Executive Director of Path Forward. I'm Nathaniel Janik, the Career Services Coordinator at AGU, and I'll be hosting today's webinar titled Back to Work, Restarting Your Career in the Sciences After Caregiving. Once again, presenting today's webinar is Tami M. Forman, Executive Director of Path Forward, a nonprofit organization that creates mid-career internship programs to ease the transition back to work for men and women after taking a break for raising children or other caregiving responsibilities. Path Forward trains HR teams and hiring managers on how to support these programs successfully and provide support to participants to make the experience successful. Tami is building this organization from the ground up, working with donors, partners, and participants to fulfill the organization's mission. Tami spent a decade as a tech marketing executive with data solutions provider ReturnPath. Before that, she worked in book publishing at Simon & Schuster and Houghton Mifflin and held senior-level web editorial positions at iVillage and News Corp. Tami is passionate about helping women have high-achieving careers while living joyful lives. She lived in New York City with her husband and two kids aged 7 and 9. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to you, Tami. Take it away.
Great, Nathaniel, thank you so much. It's awesome to be here. Okay, hold on. I'm going to show my screen. You should see my screen. Thank you so much, and thanks to the folks at AGU for inviting me today. I'm really excited about this webinar. As Nathaniel mentioned, I am the leader of Path Forward, and we are on a mission to help people taking time off for caregiving restart their careers across a lot of industries, including technology, and that, of course, touches on the sciences. And I'm excited about today's webinar. We are going to be focused on folks who've taken time off for caregiving, but a lot of the advice that I'm going to have for you today applies to people in a range of situations. It certainly has a lot of applications to folks who are looking to make a shift in their career, make a change in their career. And there's even some advice in here that hopefully will be helpful for any of you who are maybe just starting on your science career. So hopefully lots of applications. I love doing these types of webinars and presentations in September because I like to think that September is the new January. For those of us who celebrate Rosh Hashanah next week, September is the old January, but there's something about a feeling of newness as the kids are going back to school. For those of you who actually have or maybe are working in academia, you may feel that as part of your life now, but there's just a new feeling. And I think for women who are looking to restart their careers after taking time off, and men too, but certainly women who've taken time for childcare, there's something about that back to school feeling as the kids are going back to school that makes people start to think like maybe this is the year that I should think about going back to work. So we definitely see a lot of inbound interest from folks who are looking to go back to work at this time of year. So it's a very timely topic. And we're going to start by talking about where we start. And I think we're also going to open with a poll as well. All right, Nathaniel.
Yeah. So the first poll, how would you describe your career stage? Your options are just getting started, mid-career looking for a change, mid-career looking to restart, or looking to advance. So go ahead and put in your responses. I'm going to give a few more seconds before I close it. In 3, 2, 1. And it looks like we've got about 29% mid-career looking for a change, 18% mid-career looking to restart, 46% just getting started, and 7% who are looking to advance.
All right, great. I love that. Okay, great, good. So as I said at the beginning, I think there's going to be a lot of advice in here that's applicable across all of those life stages. So I think of every new career stage as a start, right? Whether you're 25 and just starting your career, 35 and in the middle of it, 55 and towards the end, but thinking about a second act, whatever stage you're at, you're starting again. So the first thing that I recommend people do as they start to think about making any kind of a change or shift in their career is researching yourself. And what I mean by that is take a look. I always tell women when they come to me for advice, like the first thing I want you to do is to pull out your resume and not panic, right? Not like try to rewrite it as a first act. Just read it, right? Like read your last known resume. Think about what you did in your career, what you've liked the most, what you haven't, what you've been doing when you haven't been working. And if you could see me, I would be making air quotes because, of course, no one who's home doing caregiving is not working. But since you've been out of the professional workforce or the academic world or whichever world you came from, right, what have you been doing in that time? Have you been doing volunteering, other kinds of community service? We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But when you do this research about yourself, I love to have people do kind of 3 lists, right? The things that you love to do, that you enjoyed the most in your career to date, have enjoyed the most. Things that you want to learn, so what are new skills or experiences that you'd like to add to your portfolio? And what are the things that you hate doing, right, that you don't want to have to do again? And that's going to help provide a framework for you to start to think about how to look at what the opportunities might be for you, what kinds of jobs to hone in on. So this starts to help you think about, what your next job might look like, and you can start to align those things with what the marketplace is looking for, right? Which is really what jobs are, right? It's the marriage between what you are good at and like to do and what the marketplace is willing to pay someone for. So that's where you really want to be. The second thing that I tell people to do is find your tribe, and it does not need to be the tribe of the floral skirts, but it should be, you want to find folks who are in a place that you're in where you can get support and help each other. I'm going to talk more in a bit about networking, right, and the connections that we need to be making in order to make a change to our career, advance our career, right, all those different things. But it is very important right from the beginning to kind of get yourself back out there. So some things that we recommend is looking at industry blogs to see kind of what's been happening since you've maybe been out of the workforce, joining groups. This can be things like LinkedIn has group functionality. I had to, of course, include AGU Connect, which is this great social networking platform that AGU has recently launched. In the real world, there's meetups where you can actually get in person with people. It's amazing these days that we still do that, but we do. And so all those kinds of things, right? And then Stack Overflow, which is something you might be familiar with, is another site where people can ask questions and answer questions, and you can start to get to know people. So these are all opportunities for you to start to connect with people in your field or in your prospective field, to get information and also to start to make the kinds of connections that can help move you forward, and also to get the kind of support that you need. Job hunting in any life stage is difficult, and the more that you can get support from people who are in a similar place, the better off that you're going to be. And that's going to be very helpful for you. And then the third thing I tell people as they're getting started is to keep moving forward. It's very easy when you're job searching to get discouraged. And I find, as I talk to a lot of women who are looking to restart their career after caregiving, they tend to take the rejection that is part and parcel of job searching quite personally and almost prophetically, like, oh, no one's ever going to hire me again because. And that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? That can become the kind of thing that we start to believe is true, as opposed to just taking the rejection as part and parcel of the job search process. It's the least fun part of it for sure for all of us, but it is just part of it. And I think you need to try to see the no's as just another step toward a yes. It's just one more step that you have to take. And sort of knowing that and continuing to move forward is, hopefully some of you are familiar with the work of Angela Duckworth, right? Like grit is the thing that is the predictor of success, right? The most successful people tend to be the people that have the most grit. And grit is really about the ability to move forward in the face of obstacles and across a long period of time. And I can think of few things that exemplify that as much as a job search, right? It can take a long time. It can be very discouraging, but the people who win are the ones who keep moving forward. So before I get into the real meat and the heart of our content today, where I sort of I'm going to talk very specifically and tactically about some steps that you can take in your job search, but I wanted to take a minute to talk about this concept of a returnship. So what is a returnship? So a returnship is something you may have heard about in the news a little bit. They've been around for a few years now. And as the name suggests, they are like an internship, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, having been through university systems and possibly having done summer college internships. But the twist on it is that it is an internship that is specifically geared toward those who are returning as opposed to those who are starting a career. So this is a program that's existed in the financial services world for some time. Goldman Sachs was one of the first companies to start a formal returnship program, followed by the folks at Credit Suisse, Morgan Stanley, a bunch of other big banks have programs like this. And they've started to become popular in the tech sector as well. So Path Forward runs a program with a number of technology companies, including Verizon and PayPal and Oracle. And we run these programs with them and help them to find great candidates for their programs. And then another program that you might want to be aware of particularly is a program that's run by the Society of Women Engineers in partnership with another company called iRelaunch. And it's specifically called the STEM Reentry Task Force. And what's interesting about this program, particularly folks on this audience, on this webinar, is that they are 100% focused on engineering and focused on engineering more broadly than the Silicon Valley tech industry sometimes thinks of engineering. So this is not just software engineering, but this is mechanical engineering and other engineering disciplines. Their employers include Ford and GM and Cummins and IBM and some other companies like that. So they are looking for women coming back into STEM careers in a range of industries. So I highly encourage you to check them out. And if you go to their website, you can sign up to be alerted when one of their employers is looking for people to relaunch their careers. So let's talk specifically now about what the opportunities are in the sciences. So working with the folks at AGU, we came up with this sort of 4 big buckets just to start to get your thinking around broadly what the areas are for people in sciences. So many of you are probably familiar with jobs in academia. And I actually want you to think about this bucket even more broadly than you might today, which is sort of all the education that can happen around science. So this would be anything from, K through 12 programs, obviously university programs, and also things that might have an educational component, and then all the things within that that go beyond teaching, right, and research, which might also include administration and other kinds of things. So that's a pretty big bucket right there. The next big bucket is nonprofits, and this includes everything from organizations that are doing actual programs around science, but also think tanks and anything that fits into the not government but not for-profit, right? All of that stuff falls into that nonprofit bucket. And there's a number of organizations in the sciences that fall into that. Government is obviously a big piece, right? And there's all kinds of government work that is available for those who have science backgrounds. The federal government is one of the biggest employers, maybe the biggest employer in the U.S., so this is a pretty big sector all on its own. And then lastly, industry, which for our purposes is any company that doesn't fit into the other 3, right? Any company that's working for profit and, again, has a range of opportunities. So the American Geosciences Institute put together this infographic, which I found and quite loved, which I wanted to share with you, and I highly recommend that you take a closer look at this and all the career content that AGU has put together for you. If you download the handout, you can click right on that link, Preparing Our Workforce Initiative, which will take you to this infographic and more information behind it. But what this infographic is showing you is all of the subsectors underneath those buckets that we just talked about, right? So within the academic world, you start to see all the different jobs that fall into academia. The same thing with business and the same thing with government and research. So you start to see how those different areas can break down into actual jobs. And I think what's interesting about this infographic is you can start to see where some of the same jobs fall into different sectors, right? Because there's a need for engineers, for example, in academia, in government, in industry, in research. So, you may think of yourself as one thing, but that thing has applications across a much broader range. And I think when you're thinking about restarting your career particularly, it's helpful to start by taking a wide lens and thinking about what the opportunities are that are out there where you can start to think about retooling yourself. So I want to tell two quick success stories of folks who have science backgrounds who started in one area and moved to another, and in both cases taking some time off in between for family reasons. So the first one is Laura Stupi, and she was a participant in a Path Forward program at a company called Demandbase, which is a small business services software company based out of San Francisco. She started her career as a staff geologist, and then she actually moved into a sales position with a company selling doing real technical sales type stuff, right? So a sales job, but one of those sales jobs that requires you to do testing on instrumentation, for example, and then moved into another similar type of position, and then took a break of a few years to take care of her young daughter. And when she was looking to return, she wanted to actually do something different, but she wanted to take a number of skills she had amassed in her prior career around client service, around sales and having those types of conversations, but also not losing the background that she had around science and technology. And so she did the Return to Work program through Path Forward at Demandbase in a customer success role, and is doing really well there, and is finding that it's different in ways that are stimulating to her, and but also allows her to use a lot of the things that she learned in her early career. So again, when you download the handout, or if you downloaded the handout and you click on her name, Laura Stupi, that will take you to our website at Path Forward, where you'll see a full write-up of her success story, and I think you'll find it quite inspiring, because I know I do. And then the next one is actually someone from AGU, and I'm really excited to be able to highlight Pernod Tea. She's got a really great story. So she and her husband were both professors. They were at a university in Georgia, and both on soft money. And then her husband got an offer for a job that had hard money attached to it. It was a government job in D.C. So she started looking for jobs in D.C., but for a while they were separated. So he went to D.C. to do the job that he had gotten, and she stayed in Georgia continuing to work at the university, but looking for other positions. And after 2 years of that, which I think you can imagine is quite trying for everybody, she decided to take the plunge, take a little bit of time off, and move to DC without having a job in hand. And what she ended up doing was getting an offer at AGU to work as the program manager for education and outreach. And again, if you click on her name in the handout, you can go directly into the AGU website where you can see this write-up, another very inspiring one. And what I love about it is how she took what was a really specific background around being a professor and is able to broaden it, right? She's now working on education programs that have a much broader application than just teaching, classes. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but just sort of, is able to take one piece of experience and retool it into a different way. And what she says, which I think is great, is she doesn't miss grading student work, but she does sometimes miss classes. But she feels like she's making an impact in the AGU community in a way that's quite fulfilling for her. So again, I think you'll find that to be a very inspiring story. Okay, so before we get to our next section, Nathaniel is going to do our next poll.
Hey, yeah, so our second poll is, what part of the job hunt are you most dreading? Is it A, networking, B, resumes and CVs, C, interviewing, or D, all of the above? And our responses, we got 45% are most worried about networking, 20% are concerned about interviewing, 10% are worried about the resume or CV, and 1 in 4 respondents said all of the above.
Well, I'm not surprised for two things. I'm not surprised there's a fair number who are in the all of the above category, because I think when you ask people a lot of times it's like, what's the hardest part about job searching? Like all of it, just all of it. But I'm specifically not surprised to hear that that nearly half of you are most worried about networking, because it's definitely the thing. Like just saying the word makes people go like, oh my gosh, I don't even want to think about it. It feels just, it doesn't feel fun, right? So I am actually I want to change how you think about networking. I want to change how you think about it so that you don't have that dreaded feeling. And I want to reframe networking for you. So first I want to talk to you about the 3 reasons why it's so important, why you need to network as part of your strategy for restarting your career. And the first reason is that often the difference between 2 equally qualified candidates can come down to connections. Direct connections, certainly, but even indirect connections. And it can definitely give somebody an edge. The second reason that it's important is that people hire people, not resumes. That's not to say the resume isn't important, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But people hire people, and that's just the way it works. And so the third reason, which is the most important reason why networking is important, is that most jobs are actually hidden, meaning they never get listed anywhere. They happen when someone decides, oh, we need somebody to do this. Oh, hey, I know somebody. Let's bring them in, right? There's this whole hidden job market. And so that's why it's important to network. But I want to change how you think about networking. Instead of thinking about it as this sort of smarmy practice where you go to a terrible cocktail hour and try to meet as many people as possible and get them to help you get a job. Like that's, I think, how a lot of people think about networking. I instead want you to think about it as a learning opportunity. And hopefully for those of you in sciences who've spent a lot of time in learning environments, this will resonate with you, right? Networking is not about who you can get to do something for you. Networking is about what you can learn. And I know that it's often said, you know, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I think that's part of why we kind of have this visceral reaction to networking, because it sounds like, oh, it doesn't matter if you're any good or you know things, it's all about who you know. And it's sort of, again, it has that smarmy feel to it. But I instead want to change the way you think about it. Who you know is what you know. Okay? So I want to change that frame. So it is about what you know, and it is about how good you are, but it is the people with whom you connect who can give you the knowledge that you need. And that's about the hidden job market. It's about what it takes to be successful in a given company. It's about how you get ahead in your career, right? Networking is about who you know is what you know. And that's how I want to change your frame. So now I'm going to give you what is hopefully some very practical and actionable advice about how you can network without feeling icky. And yes, I use the word icky because it is how most people think about networking, and I want you to not think about it that way. So remember that that connections equal knowledge and knowledge equals power, so that's where we're going with this. So I want you, when you think about your networking practice, and I really want you to think about it as an ongoing practice, not just a thing you do one time because you're looking for a job, because that's part of what's going to make it effective. But if you're starting anew, I want you to start with the people that you already know. So again, I think networking is one of those things that people think of as like, oh, I have to go find people. I have to go meet new people. That's what networking is, right? Like, and that's part of it, right? You do want to build out your network and build out your connections, but you actually want to start with the people you already know. Who do they know? What information can you gather from them about their career, about where they've gone, about what they've done, and how can you start with the people that are already in your network? So that may be people that you've worked with in your past. That may even be people who are in your network outside of your professional arena, people that you know through your church or synagogue, people you know through your children's schools or other types of community work, right? So you want to start with the people that you already know. And then the second one is probably one of the key things that I think will help you feel less icky about networking, which is think about the process of asking for information, not looking for a job, right? The job is something that will come through the process, but what you're looking for is information. You're looking for information about what jobs are available, what it takes to get those jobs, what those companies are like to work for, what other companies are like that company, what other organizations. Again, if we think back to that infographic, right, with all those places where someone with a science background can potentially find work, like, how are you going to know what companies need those things? How are you going to know what those jobs look like in those types of organizations? How are you going to navigate the whole nonprofit world, which is very big and amorphous and has big and small and everything in between in terms of organizations? How are you going to navigate all that? You're going to get that information, and that information comes from people. The third thing that I want you to think about is showing your work and finding ways to work with others. A few weeks ago, Adam Grant had an editorial in the New York Times about networking and kind of casting aspersions on the whole idea in ways that I actually agreed with, because I think he was saying a lot of the things that I'm saying here, that it's not sort of that smarmy cocktail thing. And his whole point was that it's the work that you do that gets you ahead, and it's that you get those connections through doing work with people and doing work that has value in the world, and people see that work and then they want to work with you and be part of you. So I think that is good advice. I think it can be somewhat daunting for people who are out of the workforce, right? That feels like another hurdle, except when you remember that one of the glories of the current era that we live in around technology is that you no longer need permission to work, to show your work. You can put code up on GitHub. You can start a website in a few minutes, right? You can start a blog for free, right? You can answer questions on sites like Stack Overflow and LinkedIn groups, right? You can find ways to show value and show your work in the world, right? It doesn't have to have a paycheck attached to it in order for it to be a way that you interact. And finding ways to work with others and collaborate is another great way to network. And again, doesn't feel like the way we think of when we think of networking. It's always helpful to focus on what you can give. When you put yourself into a state of generosity where you're looking to figure out what you can give instead of what you can get, that first of all makes you a more pleasant person to interact with. So it makes your networking likely to be more successful because you have this generous frame that you're coming from. But it's also likely to relax you and make you feel better about the interaction if you're not thinking about what can I get from this and instead thinking about what can you give, right? You have information as well that would be helpful to people, whether that's about companies you've worked for, organizations you've been a part of. So you have something to give as well. And that's an important way to focus. It's always great to take a class. That's a great way to meet people, and kind of like the show your work and finding ways to work with others. That's a very concrete way to work with people. Again, not for pay, but in a way that's very constructive and can show your skills and talents, and obviously has a lot of application in the job search anyway. So anything you can do to take a class. Obviously, there's a lot of great online resources, and you want to be deliberate about how you interact with folks when you're online only. But if you can take that out into the real world, that's great as well. Making introductions is actually a great way to network, right? When you become known as a connector and you introduce people to each other, you are top of mind when people are looking to make introductions. So being a connector is a great way to really quickly grow a network. You become known as someone who is able to connect people. And it doesn't take long when you get back into this mode of thinking about how you can be connected to and connect with other people to start seeing how you can make connections within that group and introduce people to each other. And it's a really great way to become a part of a community and get really connected, again, in a way that feels like you're giving and being helpful. And the last thing I always tell people when it comes to networking is be thankful. And I think that's, again, a frame that just helps you feel better about the process and realize that, this is part of the new economy, right? Part of the new economy is what do you know, who do you know, how can you trade information, how can you trade connections, and how can you use that to further your own career growth, but also further the people around you. And again, I think when you have that much bigger, broader, thankful, generous frame, it just makes the whole experience much more pleasant for you and for the people that you're connecting with. So I was actually glad to hear that folks that the resumes got the lowest amount of anxiety, because I think that's kind of where it belongs. Resumes are important, but they also kind of fit into the category of it is what it is, right? Like, you know, short of having a time machine and going back and redoing the whole thing, like, meaning your career, by the way, not your resume, right? Like, there's not much. Your resume is what it is. Your resume is the document that shows your skills and your experiences that you've garnered up until now. The top question that I get asked about resumes is what to do about the gap, right? What do I do? I try to hide it? Do I put, you know, chief household officer at the, you know, what do I kind of do with this? So here's what I tell people about how to deal with a gap. I tell people very much, don't try to hide it, because that generally backfires. Recruiters are not spending a lot of time with resumes, generally speaking, and they are going to, anything that looks sort of off kilter, they're going to, anything that makes them go, huh, that doesn't make sense, is going to be unhelpful to you. It's much better to sort of call it out. You don't have to get into the whole chief household officer. I think that's kind of had its goofy moment and come and gone. But you can put on your resume, you know, that you were a caregiver from this date to this date, you know, 1 or 2 sentences, you know, took some time from my career in order to take care of my family, you know, excited to be getting back. And then, you know, question asked and answered, and you kind of move on. The other thing I tell people to do, however, is definitely take credit for any work, whether it was paid or unpaid, that you did while you were, quote unquote, out of work. And I'm putting that in a quote unquote because nobody who's home taking care of children, by the way, isn't working. But I'm actually talking about sort of the bigger stuff that you may have been involved with. If you were involved with a volunteer organization, if you were involved with your kids' school, if you were involved with you know, other kinds of community groups, or if you were even doing some freelance work or consulting work, or doing work with, you know, the university that you were affiliated with or the college you were affiliated with, you know, any of those kinds of things, even if they were not work done for pay, are things that you should take credit for. Now, there's a lot of research out there on, you know, on resumes, and it's very, very true that having the PTA on your resume, you know, it makes it harder for you to get an interview than not having that, right? There's definitely things, you know, bias exists in the world, and I don't want to overlook that. But I also think that taking credit for the stuff that you've done is important, and trying to, I think, overcome bias by pretending you're somebody you're not doesn't generally work. So take credit for what you've done. Don't try to hide your gap, and focus on all the great things that are on there. Now, one thing I do also recommend that people do, particularly those who've taken time out of their career for caregiving, is to highlight recent coursework that you've done. And I think this is especially true for people coming back into science and technology jobs, that, you know, you want to highlight if you've taken classes, if you've engaged in any kind of a university program, either in a formal way or just by taking some coursework. But anything like that is going to show, first of all, drive and commitment, just generally speaking, right? It shows that you're ambitious, that you're a lifelong learner, that you want to be engaged in acquiring new skills. But for science and technology, it's also important to show that you are up on the latest and greatest, and you are working to get yourself reskilled in the latest and greatest. This is particularly important for those who've been out of the workforce for a long period of time. If you've been out for a few years, this may not be as important, or as urgent, I should say, but for those who've been out for 5 or 10 or 15 years, showing recent coursework is a really important way to show that you are working to get yourself back up to speed within the industry. And as you highlight that coursework, consider you know, including information about why you took the course, what did you get out of it, how you use the skills, how you plan to use them in the future, right? Really elaborate on what you've done in ways that are going to be helpful. So this information is available in your handouts. I'm not going to read you every bullet point. I'm sure you'll be thankful for that. If I had 2 words to sum up this entire slide, it would be follow directions. That's probably the most important thing when it comes to resumes. I think the other thing that's important for people to realize is that way back in the prehistoric era in the 80s and 90s, when I started looking for jobs, applicant tracking systems were something that wasn't widely used. It was mainly very, very large companies that had built out their own systems for tracking applications, and you'd had to fill out this form online, and it seemed very onerous. But it was really large employers that did that. Most companies in the mid-size and even companies with several hundred employees would not do that, right? You would send your resume in through email, or you might even put it in the mail with a stamp, which just seems so archaic now. But nowadays, software companies exist that allow even very small companies, even companies as small as 100 people, to have applicant tracking systems. So the need to be able to understand how those systems work, how to keep the formatting from getting wonky, how to upload a PDF, right? That's all really important. There's reams of information out there about how to apply online for jobs and kind of the logistics and the tactics around this. So if this is something that, if this entire slide was like, what is she talking about? Definitely try to seek out some information around how applicant tracking systems work and how to use them to your best advantage. So I'm not surprised that interviews was the next thing that people worry about, because I think it's definitely the nerve-wracking part of the job search process. So in terms of thinking about how to prepare for the interview, one thing I want to make sure to highlight for people is that there was a little bit of a vogue, particularly in the technology industry, although it spread out into other industries, around asking kind of wacky questions. And it was Google that was the most famous for this, right? I think they had a question that was something like, how many golf balls fit into a jet plane, or something like that. And it was supposed to both test how you were under pressure and also how you kind of figure stuff out. So this is an actual question that I was able to find from a Whole Foods market. So again, showing how that that type of style had shifted. But really, this has gone the way of the horse-sized duck, or whatever that might be. So now what companies are doing when it comes to interviewing techniques is focusing on what is called behavioral interview techniques. So that means asking questions that are meant to get you to tell a story about your skills and experiences that are focused on what you have done as opposed to what you theoretically would do, or what your opinion is about your level of skill, or about how good or not good you are, right, at a specific skill. So it's meant to illustrate what you have actually done and experienced, and how your skills were brought to bear on that. So these, you can Google behavioral interview questions, and you'll get thousands and thousands and thousands of them, which I highly recommend you do, because then you can practice some specific answers. But the basic framework is, for a given situation, sort of describe the situation that you were in. What did you then do, right? How did you do it? What exactly did you do? And then what were the results? What was the effect? And the results of any given story can be positive or negative, right? You can show that something didn't work out, and then therefore you learn from that to do something different the next time through. But the focus is to highlight what you did and what you learned from what you did. And so the biggest thing to do to be prepared for any interview, but certainly for a behavioral interview, is to get together some stories, right? If you think about what are the skills and experiences that you want to highlight, what are the experiences you've had, and what are the stories you can tell about that, and practice those stories, right? Practice telling those stories in ways that fit some of these scenarios. And you should be able to come up with stories that would fit a number of different ways that the question might be asked. And one thing to think about, and this is going back to what I was saying about resumes and kind of taking credit for things that happened outside of the paid workforce, think about the skills and experiences that you have amassed as you've been focused on caregiving. And that includes, for many people, running volunteer projects or being part of a volunteer project, managing your children's special needs cases, coordinating moves, including large international moves. And what are some of the skills, and how do you translate that into work language, business language, right? Running volunteer projects requires you to persuade people using influence versus authority, right? You're not giving them a paycheck. They don't have to do what you say. So you are persuading them using influence. That is a highly desired skill in today's very collapsed pancake style, no hierarchy organization. That can be a very effective skill in academia, where there's a lot of blurred lines in terms of authority. The ability to collaborate with different personalities and manage competing agendas, to focus on goals and accomplishments, right? These are all things that have application in the business world. And so as you think about how to put those stories together, you want to think about how you talk about your experiences in ways that show how that has an impact for an organization or a company that you're interviewing with. It is your job to show how your skills transfer into a different arena. And so that's for you to figure out, what is it that you have learned from these experiences? How does that apply across a range of organizations? And how do I talk about that in a way that the hiring manager or the recruiter is going to go, oh, you know what, that could be really helpful for us. So it's always important in general when you're interviewing to listen to the question, but the most important thing is to practice. Just practice, practice, practice. Get your stories together. Think about what you want to highlight. Make sure that you're talking specifically about what you did and what you learned from what you did, not what you would do. And then just, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. There's no substitute. If you can find a sympathetic, non-judgmental friend to let you practice with, that's the best. But you can also just do it in the mirror, and it's always a little awkward, but there's no substitute for telling your stories out loud before you get to the interview. You want to make sure before you get to your interview that you're doing your homework. So you want to do your homework on the organization itself, right? What do they do, and what's been written about them in the press recently? What have they launched? If they're the kind of company that produces something, what have they produced? What does their latest earnings report look like? This is going to be true in nonprofit world as well. What have their impact statements been? Look up their annual reports. For academia, there should be plenty of information about any kind of educational institution you're looking for. So do your homework, but also specifically do your homework on anyone that you're interviewing with. So you should be looking everyone up on LinkedIn. I know for those of us who are in the Gen X and older category, it can feel a little creepy and sort of internet stalkerish, but it's really expected nowadays that you will have looked up anyone that you're interviewing with on LinkedIn and kind of gotten a sense of their career, so that you can ask them specific questions about their job at that organization, but also in general. And so having that information going in is really, really important. And it's important because it will help you to ask good questions. You always want to ask questions, and you want to ask questions particularly in the early going, in the early interviews. And I think of early interviews as everything before an actual offer has been made, right, where you're trying to convince them that they should make an offer to you. You want your questions to be focused on the company, the organization, and how you can contribute to that organization, right? You want to be asking questions that show that you want to learn more about them and learn how you can be successful there. You don't want to be asking questions that indicate you're all about what's in it for me. Save those for the negotiation section when you've got an offer in hand and you're making that decision and you need some information. Some of the things around hours, for example, and even vacation and things like that, cultural questions, can be asked in more subtle ways by asking about what the company's like to work for, what's typical day look like. That can start to give you a sense of some of that stuff. But you can ask those more pointed questions when you've got to the point where you're actually negotiating an offer. You definitely want to make sure that you're sending great thank you notes. I'm always amazed at how much this makes people stand out, because I just think of this as sort of table stakes, but it still sometimes doesn't always happen. So sending a thank you note should make you stand out, but sending a really great one will really make you stand out. So the thank you note is an opportunity to really highlight your benefits of hiring you and really advance your candidacy. It's an opportunity to show that you listened to the interviewer, that you understand the problem that they're trying to solve, and that you understand how you can solve it. So, this is an opportunity for you to really show your value to the organization. If you met with multiple people, you should send them all a thank you note. And while you can highlight some similar things, you should definitely make them sound different. Hiring committees will often share those follow-ups, and if they're all the exact same, that will be noted, and not in a good way. So you want to make sure that that you're focusing on differences, and that also should be personalized. Obviously, you had a different conversation with each person, so you should be able to focus on something specific for each one of those. So again, your interview checklist is making sure that you're doing your research about the company, and really digging a bit, setting up Google alerts and, looking up press and things like that. Make sure to go into the interview with a printout of the job description so you have that in front of you, and also your resume. It's going to make you feel a little bit better if you have those things that you can refer to as you're going through. You want to make sure you're looking everybody up on LinkedIn and you're getting those names before you go in there. Pulling your stories together and preparing how you're going to ask those questions, and then sending those quick thank you notes. Before we get to Q&A, so I wanted to throw this up here. Job searching under any circumstances is always difficult. It's one of the hard things we do in life is, finding new career opportunities. And you may have had a plan for yourself, right? You were going to get your degree and maybe get another degree and go along and get this job and that job, and then, just merrily go along. But of course, the universe has other ideas, right? The universe throws up obstacles and things that make our plans not work out quite the way we'd expected them to. But what I like about this cartoon, and the reason I always show it when I do these types of seminars, is because what I notice about the bottom panel is that the flag at the end of our journey is much higher, much higher than the flag at the end of our imagined journey if we had followed our plans. And that is because it is the trials and tribulations that you go through that are what make you accomplish the great things that you're going to accomplish. There's a great African proverb, right, that smooth seas do not make skillful sailors. It is the trials and tribulations that give us the fuel to go higher than we could ever imagine. So, so with that, I want you guys to be thinking about what you might do this week to get yourself started. So Nathaniel has one more poll with some resolutions as we're coming into the new school year. What are we going to do this week to get ourselves moving forward? Let's make a resolution for ourselves.
So the final poll, what is your Monday resolution? 28% said they're going to research 3 companies. 22% said they are going to reach out to a former colleague. Another 22% said research a meetup group. 17% are going to be investigating an online course, and 11% are going to rewrite their resume or CV this weekend.
Awesome. I love those resolutions. Those are all great ones. And bonus points if you do all of them, by the way, and you can email me and tell me you did all of them. So we're going to do questions right now. Before we do that, I just want to make sure to call your attention. If there's any way that those of us at PathForward can help you out, please don't hesitate to send us a note. We are hello@pathforward.org. That goes to me and my entire staff. So send that note along. If you check out our website, you can sign up for our newsletter. You'll be alerted when jobs are available through our network of partners, but you'll also get content like this about interviews and resumes and networking, and also some interesting stuff on work-life balance and things like that. So, so feel free to reach out. So Nathaniel, do we have some questions from our audience?
Yes, we do. All right, so I'm going to start off with this first one regarding reinternships. Do you have any advice for those of us living in rural areas where the primary industry is tourism, for example, and no local university?
Yeah, so the bigger problem of unemployment in rural areas is one that's well known. I think for, so a lot of the answer depends on your specific skills and experiences, but there's a couple things that I would say to think about when it comes to rural areas. And we definitely don't run programs in rural areas. Most of the programs we run, frankly, are in the coastal high population areas, right? We work in New York and San Francisco and LA. So I don't know that that's a way to think about it. But in terms of overall career management in rural America, what's interesting to me is how many companies are starting to be very open to remote work, um, and even in some cases remote only. I wouldn't call this a huge trend, but it's something that we're starting to see a little bit of with companies that are working remotely. And this can be a range of jobs. Now, obviously, it has to be something that you could do from your home, but that is becoming a bigger and bigger set of functions that are available to people. And then I would also suggest thinking about what the opportunities that might be if you think about something that's not quite 100% remote, but would require less travel than a full-time in the office job. And what that can do for you is that can potentially widen the geographic area that you are looking at. So depending on how rural you are, if you're in an area that is, 2 or even 3 hours from a metropolitan area, can you look for opportunities in that metropolitan area that might only require you to go into the office once a week or twice a week? A 2 or 3 hour commute might be untenable on a daily basis, but as a weekly practice or a twice weekly practice might not be untenable. It might significantly widen your opportunity area than if you were only focused on organizations or companies that are within a shorter commuting distance. So those are a couple things to think about when it comes to looking for jobs in rural areas.
Yeah, and I actually, I lived in a rural area that was very similar to that for 4 years, and my advice to add on to that is that if you can identify work that would require your services, it takes a little bit of detective work and a little bit of imagination, but if you can identify work where you would be working and figure out who in your area is contracting out those types of services, like say there's a construction company that occasionally will need an environmental engineer, but they don't need them regularly, so they do the contract work on a case-by-case basis. They're probably doing work with somebody in the metro area. So if you can imagine where you would fit in and the companies that would work with your imaginary role, so you can get in touch with them, figure out who they work with, and then use that as a means, give them a call and say, hey, I'm in this area. Next time you guys are coming to do consultant work, do you mind giving me a call and maybe I can, tag along. So that's a good way to get your foot in the door in a scenario where you don't necessarily have access to all of the networking that you would if you were in a big city. Yeah. So let's move on to the second question here. How do employers view going from having a small period of high pay, high status jobs to a lower status job / underemployment while you're trying to redirect your career? The person who's asking the question is worried about being typecast as maybe being less than capable, or like maybe there's a reason why they left, and worried about what's being insinuated there.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a question we get asked often, right? And sort of how to think about, and it has implications for salary, and it has implications for the types of roles. And we see it happen with on both sides, right? Where it's like you are either overqualified for entry-level jobs, or you're underqualified for the jobs you maybe think would be the right level for you. So, I think one thing to do is always think about how you're framing your experience. So, if you're making a career shift from one area to another, you can explain the job you had. Hey, I had this career doing this high-paying thing that was great, and here's what I learned from that. And then I, made a shift into another area because I wanted to try something new, because I needed to step back to be focused on caregiving, whatever the reason is. And I learned a lot from that. And now I'm ready to go back to, right, assuming this person is ready to go back to the high-paying, high-status job, right? And now I'm ready to take, all that I've learned in the last X number of years and put that to value in your organization doing this. So you can not necessarily discount the experiences that you've had, but not allow them to to pigeonhole you in that way, right? Like I tried that, and maybe it was because I wanted to learn something new, or maybe it was because I had some, specific reasons for why I wanted to take that lower paying position. But now I'm ready to get my career back on track. I think it's one of the things that can be daunting for women, particularly who take a step back in their career in order to accommodate their families, right? It's not just opting out, right? Plenty of women stay in the workforce, but maybe take a step back or take a slightly lower paying or don't go for that promotion. But it is, it's certainly, I think the part of the problem is that women don't then reassert that ambition, right? So it's totally possible to then have a conversation that's like, hey, I had this big job and this big career, and then I took a step back for a couple of years, and now I'm ready to step on the gas again, and really demonstrate that that ambition is there, and that you're wanting to be driven to accomplish those career goals again. And why, I think it's also helpful to kind of frame that little break, and again, whether it was a full break from the workforce or a step back in some way, as being of value to the employer. Like now I'm reinvigorated, right? I'm reinvigorated and ready to re-engage with my career full throttle. And assuming that that's true, that can really help the employer to see how you can have value for them as an employee.
Yeah, and actually a very similar question. Do you have any advice for how to get back into a science career after several years in a different field? And she specifically wants to know how much a potential employer is going to pigeonhole me into my most recent job. She was a biologist by training, but has been spending the past 4 years in science education. She has lots of transferable skills, but is terrified that she's going to get framed as an education person for like forever. Yeah.
Well, so I think it's important to acknowledge the reality, which is yes, 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 they are going to pigeonhole you. And there's a very simple reason for that, right? When hiring managers and recruiters are looking for somebody, they are looking for somebody to check off boxes, right? They tend to be very, very narrowly focused on, does this person meet these criteria? And it's hard for them in that moment to think outside the box. So you have to help them think outside the box. Now, this is why I spend so much time in these sessions talking about networking, right? Because the way to make that case is not on a piece of paper, right? There is no conceivable way for me to help you rewrite your resume that's going to make that case for you. I mean, you will put together a resume that will make that case, but that isn't going to do it on its own. That pitch gets made in person to an actual human being who is then able to understand, right? So the pitch is, hey, I did this, I had this career, and then I took a switch, and it doesn't matter why, but I made a switch in my career. I wanted to try something new. It was an opportunity that seemed, like the good one for me personally or professionally, whatever it was, and I've learned a lot from that, and now I want to take that learning and apply it in this different way, and that is a really compelling pitch when it's made in person. It's not a compelling pitch over email. So for those of you who are out there who are hitting, they apply for this job 700 times a day on LinkedIn, please stop doing that. It's not helping you. You need to get out in the world and meet people and get introduced to people and make those pitches in person. And then I think going back to what I was saying about translating non-work experience into business language, right? So how to talk about a volunteer project in ways that hiring managers understand, oh, that's a skill that I actually need on my team, right? I need people who can do that. The same is true for any kind of a career change that you're making, right? So take the pace out of it for a minute, like whether or not you did something that you got paid for or you didn't get paid for. When you did one thing and you want to show the person sitting across the desk from you that that thing that you did has application to what they need you to do, right? Remember, the hiring manager has a problem they need solved. They don't want to hire you. That's not what they're in it for. They have a problem they need solved. How do you solve that problem? And your job is to take all the skills and all the experiences, all these great things that you've done, and translate it into their language. So how does all the things that you've learned in the last 10, 20, whatever it is, number of years, help them solve their problem? And that's your job. It is not their job to connect those dots. Transferable skills are one of those things that I think frustrate a lot of people because they think, well, why can't they just see that I could do this job? Well, that's not their job. It's your job to show them that they should be able to, that you can solve their problem. So going through the job description is a great way to do that. And then thinking about those experiences that you've had. I'm going to go back for a second to the success story of Laura Stupi, right? Who went from something, one career to something completely different. But one of the things that she was able to show demand-based is that her job as a technical salesperson, that she had to help people understand, deeply technical, very difficult content and help them to understand it in a way that would make them buy her company's products, and that she could do the same thing for software, that there was a skill set there that was fundamental, that she could apply that skill to any area that she could learn about. And I think that's when that magic happens around transferable skills, is when you can take what you know and show how it applies to this new company. Again, I keep coming back to this concept of networking and how important networking is. The way you get the information that you need to be able to translate your skills into someone else's language is through networking. That's where you learn how what companies value, what their internal language is, how they talk about what's important to them, what problems they're trying to solve, how they're trying to solve them, how they work, and that's going to give you the language that you need to translate what you've done into something that's going to be successful.
Great. I actually have one more question because it was on the list, and it's one of my favorite questions. It is, should returnees apply to a job even if they don't meet every qualification? And specifically for technical roles, should returnees apply to a job if they haven't worked with the program or software listed in the job description?
The answer is absolutely yes. And this is one of those things where we see some really interesting gender differences, where women are far less likely actually to apply to jobs if they don't feel like they meet all the criteria, and men are far more likely to. And it's the research on that has been interesting. It's not lack of confidence. It's actually a misunderstanding of the rules of the game. And you definitely don't have to have every box ticked. That is for sure. You should definitely apply for those jobs. The thing is to then think about everything I just said about transferable skills, right, and how you're going to make the case for why you would be a great candidate. The fact of the matter is nobody meets all the criteria. That's just not reality. These job descriptions get written by people, having a fantasy of what the absolute most amazing candidate could possibly look like. So no one meets all those criteria. You should absolutely apply for jobs even if you don't tick every box. On the technology side, the one thing to be mindful of, particularly for folks going into software engineering, which is the area I'm the most familiar with, many of these companies do have, whether it's a whiteboard test or sometimes even an online test before you even get into the interview. So to be honest with you, this is actually, again, where networking comes in. You can sometimes get around some of those things and get yourself in front of somebody who can look at your CV, look at your experience, and say, oh, yeah, we can teach her that. Like, that's not a big deal. And that's not always going to happen, but that's going to be one thing when it comes to real, true technical skills, where if there's some kind of a hack rank, for example, that you have to pass before you get in, that's going to be tough. But in general, I absolutely recommend that people apply for jobs if they meet enough of the criteria that they feel good about it.
All right, great, thanks. I want to thank you for taking the time to give this presentation. And I'll thank the audience as well for coming. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend.
Great. Thanks so much, Nathaniel. Appreciate it.
Yep.